Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We've got a wonderful LP2 program again. LP2, I think many of you know, is the Lifelong Peer Learning Program at the Graduate Center of CUNY. CUNY, of course, is the University of the City of New York. And we're just happy to have you here today. My name is Carolyn Setlow. I'm one of about 300 semi-retired and retired members of LP Square. I'm also a co-chair of our Friday at 1 speaker series. The Friday at 1 speaker series, our event today, for example, is funded by LP Square members by their donations to the Institute for Education and Retirement, or the IER, which is the nonprofit arm of LP Square. These are public programs, I would point out. They're offered about 6 times during the academic year at no cost to the CUNY community and at no cost to the general public. So please feel free to tell your friends and family about these events if you think that the subject would interest them. LP Square is a non-degree program of the Graduate Center. We're a vibrant, all-volunteer community of people who just love to learn from each other. We learn from each other in small study groups and special interest groups, over the lunch table, at the cafeteria, outside of the Graduate Center, in members' homes, and other venues. So if you're someone who's always asking questions or chasing inspiration or looking to connect with others who love learning, you'll feel right at home with us. So you can find out more at the following website, lp2nyc.org. That's lp2nyc.org. Or look us up at the Lifelong Peer Learning Center at the CUNY Graduate Center. So again, thanks for joining us today. Introducing today's program is actually a very special pleasure for me personally. Our guest today, as you know, is best-selling author Elliot Ackerman. Elliot and I both did our graduate work at the Fletcher School at Tufts University, which is a leading graduate school of international affairs and global business. As you see from the screen, Elliot and I did not overlap at graduate school, but in fact, his father, Peter Ackerman, and I were Fletcher classmates and remained lifelong friends until his untimely death in 2022. Anyway, I now do have the pleasure of passing the virtual mic to Tom Sear. Tom is a fellow member of LP Square, and like Elliot, a U.S. Marine veteran. Tom will welcome and interview today's guest. You're on, Tom.
Well, thanks very much. This is very exciting. And Elliot, Semper Fi, and we're so grateful that you have committed this time here today. And I can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to this. Bare bones, as some of you know already from stuff that's been put out there, Elliot is a former Marine Corps officer who served 8 years in the Marine Corps, had 5 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he's a real American hero. He was awarded the Silver Star and the Purple Heart for his combat experience and accomplishments in Iraq. And we're going to cover that. We're not covering in our questions tactics or strategy, but we're going to focus on the human and personal experience that he had leading his men in intense combat. The second phase of what we're going to do today focuses on a whole other life, professional life for Elliot, which is his writing. He's published 10 books, which 2 memoirs, 8 fiction. Well, they have certain commonalities to them. It's an extraordinary breadth of approach that you're going to get a little taste of. And indeed, there's an 11th book coming out in May, which follows on 2 of his earlier books. And we're especially grateful for his appearance here today because we're going to ask Elliot about aspects of the military in the United States. First and foremost, his comments on, his thoughts on what we're now living with respect to the attack on Iran. So, with that, let's get started. And I thought I'd show a couple of pictures just to get in the feeling here. Um, and Can everybody see that? You see yourself, Elliot?
Yeah, much younger.
Oh, you're just as good looking, and
Oh,
unlike me, you still have your hair. So
thank
I
you.
think I know when this was taken, but tell everybody if you remember.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, first, it's great to be with you, and thanks for that lovely introduction, Carolyn, and also Tom. This photograph was taken probably in December of 2004 in a town called Nasr wa Salam, which was right outside of Fallujah, and it was taken not long after that battle had finished. And in that photograph, I am 24 years old and a Marine Rifle Platoon Commander.
Thank you so much. And this, I again think tell us about this. And you're sort of in the center of this. I don't know if
Yeah.
people can see.
Um, so this was taken a number of years later. This was taken in 2008 in Western Afghanistan. And at this point, I am 28 years old. I'm a Marine Special Operations team leader and a captain. And this is our team of Marine Raiders, as well as our sister team, which is a detachment of Army Special Forces soldiers. This was taken sort of after a raid that we'd been on the night before. That's why we all look a little bit haggard and tired.
Okay. And here we go. This is you don't have enough stuff with you, you know?
Yeah, well, actually this one is in the back of a helicopter, same time frame coming back from a night raid, and you can sort of see out the window
Oops.
behind me.
Wrong way. I'm
No
sorry. I
problem.
goofed it up here. Continue. Yeah.
You can see out the window behind me. It's sort of morning, and we're coming off that raid, and that's actually me. And to my right is a good buddy of mine, a guy named Dave Gunther, who was the team leader of that special forces team. So in that deployment, we were two teams: a team of Marine Special Operators and a team of Army Special Forces working together. And so I'm in the back of the helicopter. It's early morning, as you can see, I'm sleeping. So.
Yeah, and I'm looking at this. I am 99% certain that he is saying to himself, how can Ackerman sleep now? I wish I can go to sleep.
Yeah, I
But
can sleep. I can sleep anywhere. It's a gift.
yes, I know the feeling. So just to loop it, tie this up, the reason I'm here is because 39 years before you went to war, I went to war in Vietnam, and I'm the goofy guy, the tall guy whose helmet never fit. Just my head was too big. It's kind of empty, but my head is too big. So, and that was a different war, a different time, a different place, and you're not going to hear anything about my different kind of experience. But my favorite picture that I'm going to show is this one, though. And I don't, do you remember this?
Sure, I'm 18 in that photo, and I'm just starting at ROTC, and so I'm taking taking my oath, the oath of office to begin as a ROTC midshipman in college. Yeah.
So you went to uh, Tufts and NROTC to become a United States Marine officer, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And obviously, there's standard training that you do during the summers mostly in order to be commissioned as a second lieutenant upon your graduation. But you were engaged in three other courses, programs, whatever you want to call it, that just tell us a little bit about what they were and why you did it.
Oh, you mean like summer
Yes.
training course?
Yeah.
I was very fortunate when I went through the ROTC in that I had a captain. So usually they assign a Marine captain who's in charge of the midshipmen. A midshipman's like basically the Navy and Marine Corps term for like a cadet. And the captain I worked with was just a great guy, still one of my best friends and mentor. And he was very open to the idea if I could sort of talk my way into additional summer training, that he would let me go down and do it. And he would give me a set of no-cost orders, meaning it didn't cost the government anything. I could pay my way, but he wouldn't stop me. So, I was a very enthusiastic midshipman. I was desperate to get into the Marines, and I was lucky enough to talk myself into. Well, first, with the help of a guy named General Jack Galvin, who was at that time the dean of the Fletcher School, because we're talking about Fletcher. He was a retired four-star, and I took his class on leadership, and he helped me get a slot to go to airborne school at Fort Benning one summer. Then, while I was at airborne school, I made a point of ingratiating myself with the Marine liaison down at Fort Benning. He was the liaison to the Army, major. And the next summer, I called him up and I was badgering him and badgering him and badgering him about actually wanted to go to Ranger School. And he finally said, "Listen, Ackerman, like, I'm sorry, kid. I can't get you a Ranger School slot. Those are very, very coveted." But he said, "Listen, what I can do is, the Army runs a dive school. And at the time, if you wanted to be in the Marine Special Operations world, there's sort of these two coveted schools, airborne school and dive school. And we called, in our special operations group for a while, we're called reconnaissance Marines. And so he said, I can maybe get you a seat to the Army Special Operations dive course. But here's how it works. It's a two-part process. So the first part is you go to a pre-dive course down at Fort Bragg, and the 7th Special Forces Group runs that course. And you just drive down here and take it. And they just basically, beat the snot out of you in a pool for 3 weeks. And whoever's left standing, which usually, isn't a lot, will fly those folks down to Florida, down to Key West, where the actual school is. So he basically said, if you survive dive school, the pre-dive, I can get you into dive school. And then also that same summer, as I was sort of trying to get myself into Ranger School, there was a Marine captain. He wasn't the captain in charge of me. He was actually ran the unit at Holy Cross, which was nearby. And he had a career as a reconnaissance Marine. And he sort of at some point said to me, "Hey, Elliot, like, why are you trying to go to Ranger School? The school you should be going to go to is actually a Marine school that will do something for you in the Marine Corps." And that's a school called the Amphibious Reconnaissance School, which is the school that if you pass it, you are a recon Marine. It's a 10-week course. Once again, you might detect a theme here. They beat the snot out of you for 10 weeks. And it just so happened that if the way the summer lined up was that the dive school, which all in was about 7 weeks, ended on a Friday, and the amphibious reconnaissance school started on a Monday. So I had this great captain who, said, "Hey, you want to go do this? Have at it." And I sort of, I was kind of like the dog chasing after the mail truck, and I caught the mail truck. So I was, sort of got myself in, at the time I felt like I maybe got myself in a little bit too deep, but was able to sort of go through that summer and get a lot of this training out of the way. And, and it set me up very well to then, not only have a career as a Marine infantry officer, which I did, but then segue that and enter sort of the Marine Corps special operations community. And just the way timing was, when I later entered the Marine Special Operations community, it was at a time of real transition when our Marine reconnaissance units were turning back into Marine Raider units. And for people who might not be familiar with that world, it's sort of like how it was sort of similar to when the SEAL teams were standing up out of like the underwater demolition teams. And that was a very exciting time. And so those photos you saw of Afghanistan were actually some of the very first deployments of Marine Raiders since World War II. And it was really a great, fantastic opportunity and experience to be part of that.
Well, thanks. And in one of the points, I didn't mean to throw all this, Marine Corps stuff to the audience, is less than 1% of Marine Corps officers successfully go through these courses. And two of them, the washout rate is like 50%. And I've done a lot of research on this. I don't know of anybody else before they were commissioned that went through these 3 courses. I mean, have you ever heard of anybody else other than yourself?
I haven't yet. Apologies for going into like the weeds of Marine
No,
Corps,
I understand.
but I no, and I was very lucky. Ian, it was a real sort of crack deal that I was able to sort of be the beneficiary of, and it was an incredible experience.
So you graduate, 5 years at Tufts, you're summa cum laude, you're Phi Beta Kappa, you get your bachelor's, you get your master's at the a graduate degree in international relations, you're commissioned as second lieutenant, you go through basic training, you go through one of the infantry training, one of those you were first in your class there. You get out in the Marine Corps. First thing you do is, or one of the most important things is, you have the opportunity to shift battalions. And what caused that, and why did you do it?
Yeah, again, I'm gonna risk going too into the weeds with Marine Corps stuff here, but maybe people like the story. One of the things that was sort of interesting for me I started out ROTC in 1998, and while I was in college, 9/11 happened. Um, and the sense that I had in college was, and I had added a year to my college to do this master's program. And at the time, I really thought, my God, I've really kind of screwed myself up here. Like I'm gonna miss my war. And that might sound silly, but that was really how I felt. And then when I showed up in Quantico to go through my training, I that was very much the sense too. And this was in the spring of 2003, right when the Iraq War happened. And it happened. They had the mission accomplished moment on the aircraft carrier with President Bush, and the sense amongst all of the instructors there and all of the students was, well, we missed the war. And and then that summer of 2003 into the fall, I remember in August of 2003 in the barracks, there was, at the time, we all read a newspaper called The Marine Times. And on the cover of the Marine Times was the headline, Marines Back to Iraq. And everyone was sort of confused, like, why are we going back to Iraq? That's just occupation.
Well, let me ask you to get to the heart of it. Isn't it
Yeah.
what you did was you shift battalions so you could go to Iraq?
Sure, yeah.
So you could really be in combat instead of sunny California.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
That's. So when did you get your first platoon? Your
In
platoon.
April of 2004, and we left in June.
Okay. And what was the makeup? It was about 46, 45 guys?
Yeah, we were 46 guys with attachments.
And you're the one officer in charge of this platoon. What was the age range, roughly?
Probably the most junior Marines were in about 19 or 20, and the NCOs were 21, 22. I was 24.
Were you the oldest?
No, my platoon sergeant I think he was maybe 30.
Yeah. Anybody had graduated from college?
No, I was probably the only. Yeah, I was.
Okay.
Pretty sure I was the only college graduate. Maybe
So how did you develop this platoon so that you could function as a unit and you could lead them eventually into combat? What was your approach to leadership?
Well, one of the great, it's one of the things about showing up to a platoon when you're in combat is it's very much, it's sink or swim. So it's either going to work or it's not going to work. When I showed up to my platoon, my battalion, by the way, a battalion, for people who don't know, is about 1,000 Marines. And I was with a unit called 1st Battalion, 8th Marines, or we call it 1-8. And they'd just been in the Iraq invasion. So I was sort of the new guy. I hadn't been in the Iraq invasion. About half the platoon had. So they had, combat experience, although they didn't do that much during the invasion. Inevitably, you're going to be, the new lieutenant. They're going to give you a hard time, which my guys did. Once you get through your first or second firefight, if you do a good job, kind of that, everything seems to take care of itself. So, to keep it brief, that's basically it. I made it through a couple of firefights, did a good job. Suddenly, you go from being the new guy who people don't trust to the one that they do. One of the things they teach you in Quantico is to, you really want to, you pay attention to how people talk. And when you're Marines, when you hear Marines talking about like the lieutenants in the battalion, sometimes they say things like, well, the lieutenant says this, and the lieutenant says that. Lieutenant says we got to go here. One of the things my instructors always tell me, you want to watch, because at a certain point when they start saying, well, my lieutenant says we got to do this, and my lieutenant says we got to do that, he's like, that's when you've made it, when they start talking to you, calling you my lieutenant. So that happened in Iraq.
So let me focus on the Second Battle of Fallujah. For the people in the audience, we're not going to get into the weeds here, but let me just say, Elliot and his men were in some of the most intense combat. First day, tremendous casualties, automatic weapon fire at them, RPGs, whatever they are, the rocket-propelled grenades. Um, at times, he and his men exposed themselves in order to call in fire. Other times, he and his men exposed themselves to go get wounded comrades. And what I'm going to ask you, Elliot, is not to talk about who shot what and when and ran here and there. It's what was the personal experience that you had in terms of coming under such fire and having to function in that as the leader of these men who were similarly in the same situation?
That's a pretty big question. I mean, I've written two books about it. So if you really want to know, you can, read some of my books. There's a lot to unpack there. But I would just say to try to give a succinct answer is, you got a job to do and you do your job and you focus on doing your job and any extraneous thoughts, I think you just have to, you just switch them off. In the moment, it's pretty clear what has to be done. I mean, I guess an analogy I would offer to people would be if you're driving down the street and suddenly you're on the highway and three cars collide and there's a whole big mess and you get out of your car to help, you're just going to sort of know what to do to help. You'll just be triaging a situation. And I think a lot of, combat and any type of leadership in combat is, you have training and they're using that training to, triage a situation.
Just for the audience's edification, this is one of the books that Elliot is referring to. The Silver Star citation edited is 17 pages. And I'm not going to repeat all the wonderful things they say, except they keep emphasizing two things. And let me just read one thing. His contagious combat leadership, and ability to instill this type of dedication is the stuff of legends. In combat, you obviously, when you're under fire and there is fear, we all have fear in a situation like that. You in the past have commented in a way that I find very intriguing and interesting and informative about how you dealt with fear and how you believe your men dealt with fear in this really insanity of just everything, lack of control. You're imposing your control on it. But how do you do that? And how do you analyze that?
Yeah, well, if you'll bear with me here, I think,
Yeah.
there's one of the interesting kind of things that exists in a war is that there's a certain paradox that exists. So, we talk about like fear. Everyone feels fear in combat. I've felt fear. You're seeing very difficult things and you're asked to sort of achieve a complex mission. So, you're going to feel fear as you're, fighting in a city and you have to get across the street and there's people shooting down the street. Or you'll feel fear if you see one of your friends wounded in the street and you got to get your friend. So I know what fear feels like, but then there's a question like, well, why do people, do the valorous things that they do in combat? What do they feel? And they don't feel brave. Like brave is not an emotion. Nobody feels brave. I've never woke up feeling brave. So they feel something else. And I would argue, like in this situation, I just explained, like, there's your buddy's lying, he's machine gun in the street. You got to go get him. What is the emotion you're feeling that allows you to overcome that fear? And typically it's love. Like you love these guys. Like these are your best friends. The guys I served with, I really loved them. We'd spent a lot of time together. So I've seen many people do some very brave things based off of their love for one another. And so love is really the opposite of fear. But the paradox that kind of exists in combat is that love, we have a lot of words for it. I mean, it's a fraternal love. You call it, unit cohesion, you call it esprit de corps, whatever you want to call it. When you sort of go through your training, part of the training is technical, but part of it is also, yes, building a unit that's going to cohere, building bonds in the unit so that when it comes time to accomplish the dangerous mission, you're able to all do that as a team. and that those bonds of cohesion, that's another word for love. But one of the things they teach you in your training as a Marine and anyone as a soldier is that the mission always comes first. The mission comes before the Marines. It has to, because if the mission didn't come first, you would never take a hill if you knew you were going to take 20% casualties because, you'd be trying to preserve your Marine's life. So the mission comes before the Marines. And so ultimately, kind of what that leads to is these paradoxes, where as a Marine, you have a mission. And I know, it's any type of leader, whether it's a lieutenant, a corporal, anyone, that in order to accomplish the mission, you are going to have to sacrifice probably some of your Marines. So at the end of the day, so much of war is you rely on those bonds of love to accomplish a very dangerous mission because you need the courage to do that. But you're also being called upon to destroy the very thing that you love. And anyone who steps into high intensity combat, that's ultimately what you're being asked to do. It's that type of sacrifice, destroy the thing you love in service of the mission. And it's, not surprising that kind of on the back end of that comes a lot of soul searching and heartache, because, your heart can't really break if you weren't in love. And I think, that love is something that we all had, and have to reckon with the loss of that, for years later. And that's, much of the stuff I put into my books.
Well, and you suffered, it's like over 50% casualties, I think, the first day. I think also, tell me if I'm wrong, but, you know, everybody in your platoon except for 6 people got a Purple Heart for being injured. How did you maintain a level? I mean, combat readiness only usually goes away at about 30% casualties. I don't know how you maintain being combat ready, just doing it day after day.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in urban combat, there's a lot of stuff flying around. So, a lot of those guys were, they've been hit, but they were combat effective. Like I myself was hit, but I was, I just had some shrapnel in my back. I was combat effective. And other guys weren't. But how did we do it? The same thing I was talking about, is we were a good platoon. Guys stepped up. Guys really stepped up. Young guys stepped up. I think in our after one day, our platoon, just in terms of leadership, we had 3 squad leaders who were sergeants and corporals, and we had 6 fire team leaders, and those were sort of more junior corporals. At the end of one day, we'd gone from having three squad leaders and 6 fire team leaders. Of the original, 2 of those squad leaders were gone, and 4 of the 6 team leaders were gone.
Yeah.
And who steps up? The young guys step up, and they become the squad.
But you kept functioning as a
Yeah,
unit.
because the young guys step up, and my platoon sergeant was shot in the head, so he was gone. So we kind of lost a lot of our leadership. Fortunately, I was okay, but that's what Marines do. That's why it's a special organization. That's why the people who become Marines, like they're special, and they're kids. So yeah, it's pretty remarkable.
You relate in one of the books that you had a conversation with one of your men afterwards who was suffering somewhat from PTSD, and you were, talking to him about it, and he said, "Well, sir, you had an advantage that we didn't have."
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, sir. So there's a guy in my, people sometimes ask me like, "What's the bravest thing you saw anybody do in Fallujah in
Yeah.
particular?" And I'll tell you, I mean, I saw some pretty courageous things. But I'll say, in the single bravest thing I saw was after we pushed a week, we fought through that city. The main assault took a week, and we were moving pretty quickly. And that was because they didn't want to. I mean, politically, they didn't want any perception that the Marines were getting bogged down in Fallujah. So we get to the south end of the city. And we knew we'd bypassed lots of guys who wanted to kill us. They're all behind us. We're all sorts of insurgents. And with the obvious question was like, what do we do now? Now we're at the south end of the city because we've gone from north to south. And they're like, well, we're just going to turn around and go back. So they literally just handed us maps with sort of an area with a number on every map. And they said, you're going to go out every day and you're just going to clear house to house to house to house to house. And it was basically this enormous game of Russian roulette because there's got to be some kid who's the first one to kick in the door. And a lot of times there'd be some Al Qaeda guys hanging out in the house, and they wanted to die, and they wanted to take as many Marines with them as they could. So this one of my Marines, a guy named Castelli, he was first guy in the house, got shot up, got evacuated back to the States. And at the end of the deployment, we finally made it back to the States. And one of my squad leaders was like, "Hey, you should probably check with Castelli. I don't think he's doing so well." And I went to someone like, "Hey, like, what's going on? Like, how you doing?" And he's like, he's like, I'm okay." He was sort of stuttering, like he kind of was really having a hard time. And I was like, I said, you think maybe, you got a little PTSD? And he said, no shit. So And I kind of said, all right, well, we can get you to go see the wizard, who's sort of like this, we call him, that's the
Yeah,
psychiatrist.
yeah,
Go help you out, whatever you need, buddy. And he's like, yeah, you just don't understand, sir. And I got a little offended. I was like, well, I understand. I mean, I was there
yeah.
too. And he
Yeah.
was like, no,
Yes.
not like we were. I was like, what do you mean? And he basically said to me, like, what's scarier? Being in a car driving 120 miles down the highway if you're in the driver's seat, or being in that same car and you're in the passenger seat? And he's like, I was in the passenger seat. And that always, stuck with me, because I think in combat in particular, what can be so terrifying is a lack of agency. And actually, if you have agency, and I had a good degree of agency as the platoon commander, I mean, not total agency, but I knew what was going on. I knew why we were going here, or, moving to this house or going down this street. You're a 19, 20-year-old kid, like, you have no idea what's going on. When I got on the plane, and also your perspective, I mean, I'm very fortunate. Like, I came from, I had great parents growing up. I got to travel as a kid. I went to a good college, all this stuff. When I flew to Iraq, half the platoon had been to Iraq already. So they'd been overseas. But that was probably for most of them the first time they'd ever traveled overseas. The other half of our platoon, almost none of those guys had ever traveled overseas. And about half of those guys, I'd say probably they're like, 7 or 8 guys in the platoon. This was the first time they were ever getting on an airplane in their life, was to go to Iraq, because when they went to recruit training, they were on the East Coast. They took a bus. So, it's having more of a framework for what you're experiencing also features into that sort of agency. And I think that was, it's tough. We ask a lot out of young people when they go to war.
Well, I'd love to go on this, but we got other great stuff to talk about. You had all these casualties. Nobody was killed in your platoon during this intense combat. What do you attribute that to?
Luck.
Yeah. Well, I knew you were going to say that because you've
Yeah,
said
I
it
luck.
before, but one of your Marines, Sergeant Banata or Banata,
Bonatai. Yeah.
Banata, cool guy, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Great. We're still good buddies.
And was he the guy that he could have gone home because of his teeth, and he said, "I'm going to sit around and
No, different guy. Different guy.
different guy."
David
Okay,
Davies with
but
the
he
team.
says, "You say luck." He says, and I'm quoting, "If we'd had another lieutenant, we would have come home with at least one Marine killed." And he says it was obvious he would lay his life down for his men. So to me, that is, I wish I could have served under you. But so you're there. Uh, the Why did you decide you went to the CIA after 8 years in the Marine Corps? Why'd you do that?
Well, we're talking a little bit about the time I'd spent in college going through sort of the Marines reconnaissance program. And when I went through that course, uh, there were about 40 guys in our class, and one of the guys, there were only 2 other officers, and one of those officers became like a real big brother. He's still one of my best friends, real big brother to me. And he had gone on into the Marine Force Reconnaissance units, and then had got recruited to CIA. So he was over there at the time, and kind of, he recruited me. He said, "Hey, you should come over here and work. It's great." I worked as what's called a paramilitary officer. It's sort of their special operations group, and he was working over there and said, we'd love to have you. So after 6 years on active duty in the Marine Corps, I went over and worked for a couple at CIA in their special operations.
Why'd you become a civilian? Why'd
Well,
you
you are a
leave the
civilian at
sea?
CIA. Yeah, so I had to
Pardon?
hang up my uniform and to become Mr. Ackerman instead of Captain Ackerman.
Okay, but why did you go back? Why did you get out of the war business?
I just knew it wasn't, I'd had a pretty good run, and it wasn't what I wanted to do for my entire life.
Yeah.
And many of people who I love and respect, who are my heroes, it was what they want to do for their entire life. But for me, it just wasn't. An analogy I use is it's kind of like football. So, you go into the infantry, it's like you're playing high school football. If you're playing on Friday nights, you're there for the love of the game. Some of the guys in the team are all stars, some aren't quite as good. You go into the Marine Raiders, it's like you're playing college ball. Everybody said I'm a better player. You got nicer equipment, maybe even every now and again some of your games are on TV. Who knows? You go into CIA, like now you're in the NFL. You're like getting flown in and out on private planes. You're with the best players. I mean, I would look up and down the guys who I worked with. It was an all-star squad of Marines, Navy SEALs, Delta Force guys. But at the end of the day, you're still playing football. I mean, it is generally speaking the same game, and you get to a point in your life, you say, like, listen, do I want to spend my whole life playing football? And for some people, the answer is absolutely yes. And you're Tom Brady, you're a coach, like your life, you spend your life inside of football, and there's nothing wrong with that. My problem is I was like, you know what? I think there are other things I want to do. I want to live outside of this world a little bit. So it was actually a very difficult decision for me.
You ever miss the adrenaline, miss what combat was all about?
No,
No? Okay.
no. I mean, it's people also sometimes people ask me that question, and what I say to them is like, did you have a good time in high school? And a lot of people say like, yeah, I had a great time in high school. And I'm like, do you want to go back? And no. So for me, that's sort of how I feel about it. Like I had a great time. I don't miss it in that way because I feel like I got to do it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Is there anything in particular about combat in your experience that you'd like to tell these people in the audience that have never experienced something like that? What am I missing in terms of my questions to you?
The one thing I will say on your last question, I don't miss combat. I miss seeing those guys every single day, and the work I do now is much more, solitary and as a singleton. And that actually, I think, fits one side of my personality very well. But there's another side of my personality that's more extroverted and likes being part of an organization. And I don't engage with that part of myself as much anymore. So I think, in life, we all have, like Walt Whitman says, we all contain multitudes, and sometimes, you're just engaging more directly with certain parts of your personality based off of the work that you're doing.
Okay. Well, now let's shift gears. I was going to call it a second life, but it's in its own way related to your first life, and that you draw upon a lot of that, but in many different ways. I already showed this volume, which deals your memoir, and then your other memoir deals with, as it says, America's End in Afghanistan, which is focused on the end of our involvement in Afghanistan. And if you could, in a quick way, can you tell us what that volume talks about?
Sure. I was not actually, I make my way mostly as a novelist. So when I'm sitting there working, it's mostly on these sort of, fictional projects. And I work as a journalist. When the end of the war in Afghanistan kind of came about, my book agent and editor, we decided very quickly, oh, Elliot, why don't you kind of maybe you could write a quick book about what's been going on in Afghanistan because most people haven't been paying attention for a long time. So we agreed in, mid-August of 2021 that I would write this book. Everybody went off on vacation, and then Kabul collapsed, and there was this sort of massive digital Dunkirk that occurred, if people remember, in which veterans or anyone who had a tie to Afghanistan were basically trying to get people out. And I participated in a number of those efforts. So the title of the book, The Fifth Act, is a reference to Horace, the sort of ancient playwright who said in his sort of Ars Poetica, which is like a guide about how do you write plays, he says that basically all tragedies occur in 5 acts. And so the book loosely, from sort of a policy standpoint, follows the acts being the Bush administration, the Obama administration, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, and the fifth and final act is the return of the Taliban. And then it also follows 5 cases of evacuations I was involved in that summer, which were some were successful, some were not successful, to kind of give an insight into what was going on. And in each of those cases of evacuation, kind of, I think, underpinning everybody's efforts was this idea of that we don't leave people behind. And that's an idea that is as old as warfare. I mean, like if you look at the Achilles, if you look at the Iliad, the way the Iliad ends is Achilles has killed the king of Troy, King Priam's son Hector, and he has Hector's body in his camp. And Hector sneaks into his camp to beg for the body of his son back. And that is how the Iliad ends. And why does he beg for the body of his son? Because we don't leave anybody behind. But I think everybody knew as we were trying to evacuate folks out of Afghanistan, this was going to end. We were going to leave a whole lot of people behind. And so the book also reckons with the idea of, what does it mean to leave someone behind? And I kind of, through the chapters, unpack an incident in Afghanistan in 2008, an ambush I was in. We had a tough situation with one of the soldiers who was killed, and I kind of unpack that and what does it mean to leave someone behind.
Yeah. And you have a book coming out in May, which is a different slant. You co-author it. The first maybe this is going to be a continuing series, I don't know, but the first book was 2034, the second one was 2054, and this one's going to be 2084, which I guess I would describe, I haven't read them, but I would describe as sort of futuristic war and how to play itself out. Does AI, is that a part of this analysis? I would think it would be, but I don't know.
Yeah, it is in 2054, the second book. We get into AI quite deeply. And so, this project between, I've done this project with Admiral Stavridis, who, as you mentioned, was the retired four-star. He was the commander of Southern Command in Latin America and also the commander of all troops in NATO before retiring, and is a Fletcher guy. So we
That makes him good, right?
Yeah, it makes him good. He was the dean of the Fletcher School after he retired from the Navy, and we became friendly when he was dean. And by coincidence, we actually share a book editor. But the project really looks at what we perceive as sort of the three great challenges facing humanity in the 21st century, and we tell a long arc story of intergenerational characters through those challenges. And so the first one in 2034 is a story about an imagined war between the US and China that quickly becomes a world war. That book came out in 2021. The second book, 2054, takes you forward another 20 years, and it imagines civil conflict inside the US, and also the role that artificial intelligence and our society's struggle to perceive truth kind of plays in that civil conflict. And then the last book, 2084, is sort of a deeper novel about future war, also imagining that war taking place in a Earth that is really sort of somewhat transformed because of the effects of climate change. So that's sort of the arc of this series. And the last installment, yes, it's done, but it comes out in May.
Good. Well, I'm looking forward to it. So shifting, I mean, it's just the differences in focus and not just the narrative, but the heart and soul of these books is just so different. This volume, ladies and gentlemen, is you'd call it a slender volume, 121 pages. I was going to try to describe, but you describe it to our audience. Waiting for Eden.
Yeah, Waiting for Eden is a book that's, I think, a little bit of a meditation on what it means to sort of be faithful to someone and their memory. So it opens up with a woman. Well, the opening line of the book is, I want you to understand Mary and what she did, but I don't know if you will. And Mary is the wife of Eden, and he is a heavily wounded Marine at the burn center in San Antonio. Sort of can't talk, can't see. Thinks sort of Johnny Got His Gun, if you're familiar with that book. And the novel opens a little before Christmas, and there's an incident where, of course, for the first time, Eden becomes aware of his circumstances, and tries to communicate to the outside world of what he would like to happen to him. And so the choice kind of becomes is whether or not Mary will do this. And in the course of the novel, we sort of learn about their history as a couple, and the book is narrated by Eden's dead best friend. So it's also a little bit of a ghost story.
Yeah. I must say, yesterday I was thinking of what I should do to prepare for today. And I'd read that book, I don't know, 6 months ago. And I said, I should read it again. And I'm going to read it more than once again.
Oh,
I just
you.
think to the audience, it's not a shoot 'em up book at all. and it's not, it's about very much in terms of two guys who were Marines and that experience, but it deals with aspects of their relationship, the burned, crippled, just totally, half his body's gone, and his relationship with his wife and the three of them. And it's just, I get, somebody, an interviewer, reviewer said it was like a gem, and I just think, and I don't like to compare it to other things, other, authors comparing them, but I just think, and, it stands on its own. It's sort of a unique story with the feeling in it. So anyhow,
Thanks, Tom.
you
Yeah,
couldn't have, though, tell me, you tell me if I'm right or not. This thing, which is the book that came out that, we've sort of profiled up front, could it be much different?
No, it couldn't. I mean, it says Sheepdogs. It came
Yeah.
out in August. It's fun. It's the first in a series. Uh,
Oh, yeah.
it's
I
about,
didn't. Yeah.
yeah, it's about uh, a former CIA officer, kind of a guy like me, and a former Afghan pilot, and they're sort of down on their luck. And they become international repo men. So they repossess very high-end luxury items, and the book opens with them repossessing a jet out of Uganda, and they're doing it for a guy named Sheepdog, who's sort of a shadowy figure. Think almost like kind of Charlie and Charlie's Angels, and you can imagine they steal this jet, and very quickly shenanigans ensue. The people who own the jet are coming after them, and everything on the jet isn't what it seems. And there's sort of a supporting cast of characters who are sort of fun. And in this book, I really wanted to capture the fact that, like, war is funny. It's so tense that people are constantly telling jokes, they're constantly cracking up. And I really wanted to capture that side of, it's not a book set in the war, but I wanted to kind of capture some of those characters and do something that was fun because what interests me is sort of the truth. And Waiting for Eden is not a funny book, but I think it's a very true book about sort of much more somber themes. But Sheepdogs is a fun book, and it to me is an equally true book. And I wanted to capture that as well. So yeah, so Sheepdogs was out in August, and is being developed for TV, which is exciting. So hopefully you'll be seeing it on your iPhone soon, or your television at home.
I was going to ask you about that. So Tom Hanks, you spend any time with him, and because it's his production company, right?
Yeah, a little bit. He's great. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And are you writing for it?
Yeah, I'm writing for it with a friend of mine named George Nolfi, who is a director. You might know him. He's done some of the Ocean's movies and
Oh,
a bunch of other ones. So it's also a heist book. So he and I have been having a lot of fun, getting it ready for the screen.
well, and the two lead guys, and there are other people that are also just fun to overuse that word. One's known as his name is Cheese. He's a former pilot.
Yeah. So the two lead guys, so you have the Afghan pilot, his name is Cheese. That was his nickname because his name is Aziz Iqbal, but everybody called him the Big Cheese Aziz and think he's like Afghanistan's version of Maverick from Top Gun, the greatest pilot ever produced. But when you meet him, like the Afghan war is over, he's fled to the United States and he's working in a gas station. And all he wants to do is fly again. And then he meets his sort of old buddy from the CIA, Squirrel. And Squirrel spells his name Skwrly, well, because Marines don't spell very well. They win wars not spelling bees, is I think how I put it in the book. And but Squirrel is the squirrel because he's a guy who can get you anything, very resourceful, and he enlists Cheese to help him steal this jet.
So I think I read someplace that you had buddies who you went by. One guy was known as Cheese, and the other guy was known as Squirrel. So you
Yeah, so I have one friend of mine who is very much, he's not the guy in the book,
book.
but he sort of fits the spirit of Squirrel. And I had actually my very first book, Green on Blue, not a pilot, but I named this pilot after him, one of our interpreters. We all called him the Big Cheese because he was just a guy if you met him, you know why we called him the Big Cheese. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's great that it's going to be a series. Let's see here. Um, let's anything out. The people on this Zoom interview, the audience, they're not folks. One guy was, I think, in the military as a reservist, but they've never had a military experience. Is there anything about the military, the situation, and I'm not talking about the immediate stuff with which we're going through, which I'm going to get to, but do you think there are things about the military that a lot of people just don't understand?
Um, well, I think sometimes there's a stereotype of who serves that isn't always accurate. I mean, I think that my experience was the guys I served with were pretty eclectic in their interests. We're not sort of you know all high and tight, hut guys. And for certainly the best ones weren't. I actually very early in my career, when I was still a ROTC midshipman, I was so gung ho to go into the military that my family lived in Washington, D.C. And over my Christmas break in college, I would volunteer as an unpaid intern at the Pentagon just because I wanted to be there. So I'd be sitting there over Christmas, going to office at my work at the Pentagon every day. And I just was like a gopher running things between offices. And the office I worked in, there was a retired SEAL who sat like two cubicles down from me. And this guy had parachuted into Grenada, got hurt, had to retire, is now working at the Pentagon. And I was there. I must have been there like the day after Christmas. I was sitting at my desk at like 7 in the morning, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, ready to go. And this gentleman come to me and said, "Hey, Elliot." He's like, "Come here." He's like, "Listen, it's great that you're doing all this work and you're so gung-ho to go into the Marines. Like, let me get you a little bit of advice." He's like, "I've known a lot of Marines in my time. And the very best ones were the guys who never lost sight of who they were outside of being Marines because they brought that sense of self to the organization." And I think, and I must have been 19 years old when I was given this piece of advice and always stayed with me. Because one of the things I loved about serving in the military is, yes, you do have to fit a certain mold. You're serving a big organization. But so many people, and certainly the best people, they bring who they are outside of the organization into to make it better. So I think sometimes a misperception they have in the military is that the folks who serve within the ranks are automatons, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Yeah. So let's shift to today and maybe tomorrow, because it's what tomorrow is going to be like. We don't know in this world, but and we'll talk more broadly about the Department of Defense as it is now and all that. But let's just focus on Iran, because I know I read a piece a couple days ago where you were providing some of your views and so forth. And just what do you think? What strikes you pessimistically, optimistically, or just strikes you in any meaningful way about, excuse me, where we're at right now?
Sure. I think sometimes it's easy for us, particularly early on in a war, to lose sight of the fact that war is fundamentally a political act. There's a famous saying attributed to Karl von Clausewitz that war is politics by other means. And the way I think we kind of can lose track of that is, we see all of the military accomplishments, which we're seeing right now, which are, very, very impressive. Yes, we are, out bombing the Iranians. We are crushing their air defenses. We're sinking their ships. And I don't say this to diminish how complicated that stuff is, but for us, that is somewhat the easy part. And I'm not surprised that it's militarily skewed so much in our favor, just given our technological advantages. The challenge becomes not so much the military planning, but the political planning. What comes after? Where does this lead? Because ultimately, the only reason we are engaging in these military actions is to effect a political solution. And I don't know that that political solution has been articulated that clearly yet, or that we have a plan to affect a political outcome that is satisfactory to us. So, like for instance, early on there was this sort of idea that potentially, okay, we would launch this campaign against the Iranians, and that would maybe not lead to a complete regime change in Iran, but it would lead to a change of leadership at the top that would be satisfactory to the United States, much like we recently did in Venezuela. I think after a week, it's become increasingly clear that's probably not going to be the outcome, mainly because the sort of second tier of folks to the U.S. said, "Oh, we might be able to work with them," are now dead. And I think also it wasn't necessarily a viable outcome because our partners in this war, the Israelis, I don't think will ever be okay with an Iranian regime that still holds true to the policies of the current regime, which is that Israel cannot exist as a state and still supports proxies and engages in all the behaviors that Iran has engaged in since the revolution in 1979. So that brings you to kind of another political solution, which is okay, a wholesale regime change in Iran. And there the hope is that maybe civil society or there'll be a widespread protest movement like we saw in January that leads to the toppling of the regime and a new liberal democratic government that aligns with Western values. And I'm just having a hard time seeing how that kind of just organically sprouts in the current conditions. So again, so for me, for Iran, I think like militarily, yes, it's going very, very well. But that's not actually the really challenging part. The really challenging part is the political side of this, and and thus far, it doesn't seem like there's a clear outcome. Maybe that clarity, maybe we'll start to see some of that clarity in the days and weeks ahead. But that's what I'm watching. I think that's the most important part of this.
Yeah. It's so complicated. There's so many aspects to it. But I was really struck in the recent, I think it was an article that was derived from an interview or vice versa. But you alluded to the fairly well-known philosophy or comment by Colin Powell versus the present state of affairs with President Trump. Would you tell us what I'm alluding to?
Sure, just the idea. Colin Powell famously evoked what people have called sort of the Pottery Barn doctrine, which is just you break it, you buy it, which I think we very much saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. We ousted the regime and then we poured in resources to try to rebuild those countries. I think in Venezuela, what the Trump administration did was prosecuted a strategy that was sort of we break it, you own it, meaning we're just going to break it, and then you guys, it's yours, and you deal with it. Um, and in Iran, he, is testing that policy, I think, to the extreme if it can work, and we'll have to see.
Mm, yeah. Do you think the timing of the getting out of Afghanistan was preordained, the right thing, or I mean, what's your comment on that, the timing of that, your thought?
Um, I think that if um, I think that we did not need to, if we look at the degree of troop commitment, by the time we were pulling out Afghanistan, Afghanistan was really sort of a sunk cost. I mean, the years I was fighting in Afghanistan, we had about 130,000 US troops there. By the time the Trump administration began negotiating with the Taliban, we were down to about 10,000 troops in Afghanistan. And really taking de minimis I mean, like almost no casualties. Frankly, the Afghans were taking all the casualties. So, if you're really playing realpolitik, I think the idea that we could have access to Afghanistan, a place that is, strategically important with airfields like Bagram or Shindan. I mean, right now, for instance, we're fighting a war in Iran. I mean, Afghanistan has a huge border with Iran. It'd be great if we had access to those airfields. We don't. Afghanistan also shares a border, although a very, very small border, but with China. It would be great if we had access to those airfields. We don't. So just, I think, from a just pure like hard politics point of view, yeah, I think we'd already made our down payment for Afghanistan. We might as well have held on to those airfields. I think the problem was, again, this goes to politics. The politics of the Afghan war are always pretty bad because if you look at anything, yes, we fought a 20-year war in Afghanistan, but if you look at almost any point on that timeline of that 20 years, we had announced that we were within 1 year to 18 months from major troop withdrawals. And that makes it very difficult to convince the Afghan people that you're committed to them, and the Taliban aren't just going to sort of sweep through. So, I mean, listen, Afghanistan is very, very tricky. But do I think it had it to end the way that it ended? No, I think there were better ways that that war could have ended. Which I'm happy to enumerate if you want to keep going on about Afghanistan.
No, it's it's so complicated. We could spend on most of these things. I wanted to ask you one thing that I missed earlier that I think it's important for. I think I know what you're going to say, but I don't. When you were in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, did the politics of the situation, the world politics, the politics in each country, and the political basis for the war and your views of it matter in terms of the way you approached the war, what you did, your strategy, anything about it?
Internal to units I served with, never. We never talked about politics. And I will say in my life, actually, the group of folks, of my friends who I just never talk to about politics, nor would I, are my veteran buddies. We just don't talk about it. My civilian friends, we talk about it all the time, but we just don't talk about it. I think it's just sort of custom. There's like a code of omerta that it's not spoken of. I think in terms of like, does the politics that would affect my job? Well, sure. Not in like the unit, but like for instance, like I was in Afghanistan in 2009 when Obama gave was sort of his famous West Point speech, which for those who aren't familiar with it, it was when not long after he became president, he gave a speech at West Point where he basically announced a surge in Afghanistan in the exact same speech that he announced when he was going to withdraw. And I was in Afghanistan when that happened, and meeting with frequently with Afghan tribal leaders and others, and they were sort of mystified by that. And by the way, these people like they watch CNN and they're like, well, why should I, throw in all my cards with you people? You told me you're going to be gone in 18 months, and the Taliban shadow governor who shows up here at night, he's not going to be gone in 18 months, so I have to protect myself. So in that way, yes, the politics certainly came up in my job, but not in a way like in a partisan way between Americans. No, never.
Yeah. I'm going to indulge myself as I control the mic for at least another minute about myself. And I'm in boot camp in 1964, and the company commander comes in. His name was Bill Bailey. I think he was F. Lee Bailey's brother. But he was walking up and down with his swagger stick, giving us the domino theory in very defiant terms, very, very articulate, forceful. And at the end, he left. And then the guy next to me turns to me. And as you know, in the Marine Corps, nobody ever called me Tom in 3 years. Never. It was always a number of things they called me. But then if they wanted to be nice, they would call me Sear. And so this kid turned to me and he said, Sear, what was he talking about dominoes? We're not going to play dominoes. What is this dominoes stuff? Yeah. So, when I was in Vietnam, there was no connection whatsoever. It was not like it was just us every day. And, that's that's one thing people should understand. Another item that is very complicated, but you've been very prominent on this along with Mark Kelly and others. And that is the notion, not only does a military person have the freedom to disobey what we would call an illegal order, but the obligation. And that obviously caused a lot of issues with the present administration. To me, I understand the principle, but I just wonder how can maybe every situation's got to be different, and how does that work?
Yeah.
I just don't understand, but just give us your thoughts, because there are a lot of people that are interested in that.
Yeah, for whatever it's worth, I didn't agree with the. I've got a lot of respect. I have a lot of respect for Mark Kelly. I didn't agree with that video because it was not specific. I'm like, if you're going to record a video like that and make a statement, like it probably needs to be about something that's specific. Like, hey, this is illegal, and you people need to, not sort of a vague. I thought that was like politically not the wisest thing to do. But that being said, so as a military officer, you're not obligated to follow an illegal order. So like, I'll give you an example of an illegal order, like shooting prisoners. If I'm the captain, I tell my guys, go take that prisoner and shoot him in the head. That's an illegal order. And and a subordinate would be under no obligation to follow that order. Now, frequently, the relative legality of orders is not quite as clear cut as that. And I think the audience probably of those legislatures' comments were not, a young lieutenant or a captain or a sergeant. I mean, I think probably the audience there were very senior officers. I think at the time it was when these boat strikes were occurring, basically saying to them, if you are being asked to oversee an operation that feels sort of outside the purview of legality, then you have an obligation to do something about it. Now, I think what's tricky is you have a gray space and you'll have lawyers for the administration saying it's okay. And like let's remember, like after 9/11, you had lawyers for the Bush administration saying that all of the enhanced interrogation tactics were okay and great. And I'll put on my CIA officer hat here for a moment. But so with all of those opinions from those Bush administration lawyers, CIA officers went and they waterboarded people. And then after the fact, when a new administration, a new Congress came in and investigated what the previous administration was doing and said that wasn't legal, that was illegal. Well, the people left holding the bag, wasn't the Bush administration, it was all of the people at the CIA who are civilians who did it. And then they had to basically hire lawyers to defend themselves for actions the administration took. So this legality is it's something at a senior level. I think you have to watch, and you have to, if I was a 3 or 4 star general or a member of the senior intelligence service and was asked to engage in an operation that was kind of really pushing the boundaries of what was legal, I'd certainly pause, because I would know that yes, the current administration might not prosecute me. They might want me to do this. But on the backside, because there will be a new Congress, and there will be a new administration, you could find yourself, up to your eyeballs in legal fees.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to, I could ask you your opinion on the Trump administration and the Department of Defense, but well, let me ask you, what do you think of the present state of affairs? What we have
I'll go to this. I haven't seen anything right now that I say is like outright illegal. But I think the administration is certainly breaking lots of norms in ways that I think are negative for our democracy. And I think this war in Iran, sort of the way that it's been initiated, I don't think the administration is doing itself any favors, because it was a sort of, if we think of even the run up to the Iraq war, I mean, you had a significant bipartisan vote in Congress in support of the war. Remember, President Bush sort of took it to the UN. He couldn't get it across the finish line in the UN, but there was a whole sort of multi-month debate about it before it happened. And even then, the war became very unpopular very, very quickly when things didn't go exactly according to plan. So I think the challenge that President Trump is going to have is, if this doesn't go off anything, unless it's sort of flawless, he has, really very little wiggle room politically to do anything. So I think it breaks a lot of norms in how we fight wars, but it also, if I was in the Trump administration, would say like, geez, guys, like, we are really walking a fine line here if we want to achieve our objectives.
Well, how about if you were a general or a colonel in the military now? I mean, I would think you would have a lot of trouble with just the way the mindset of the Department of Defense in terms of how it views the world and military actions and standards, or the absence thereof. But
yeah, I mean, listen, I don't speak for all
yeah,
service
yeah,
members.
yeah.
Like it's a very politically, it's as diverse as the country is in many ways. So I'm sure if someone, listen, I'm sure there are many people in uniform who, who are like much of America, like what the president is doing right now. And I'm sure there are others who, are appalled. I know are appalled by it and don't understand where the country's going. I think, so, I can only speak for myself as a citizen. And I think personally, as a citizen, I think that we live in an age of extremes, and those extremes are not serving regular people. So I think we live in an age of political extremes, where if you're like way on the far right or way on the far left, you seem to be being serviced well. But if you're just sort of like a normie, no one's really talking to you anymore. And I think we live in like an age of economic extremes where if you're, you know, a gazillionaire, so the society sort of conforms to you. And maybe if you're all the way on the other side and, you know, you have a whole support structure over here, but sort of normal people, I think, are kind of struggling to feel heard right now. And I think that's real in foreign policy and domestic policy.
So, if your son or daughter came to you, I think your children are probably younger than to get to this point, but in a few years, if they came to you, and let's focus on a daughter, I think, do you have a daughter?
I do.
Do it came to you and said, "Well, I want to join the Marine Corps and I want to become an infantry officer." What would your reaction be?
Um, It depends on who she was. You know, it's not something my daughter's
That's pretty
interested in.
good. Yes.
Depends on who she is.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't. I've thought for all of my children, my job as their father, and I would say, and to any young person who will come up to me, is my job is just to do my best to make sure you really understand what the thing is. And in many ways, it's one of the things that got me writing. I did not, when I left the military, think I was going to set out and become a novelist and have an entire writing career. I got out of the military because I just felt there were other things I wanted to do. But I did have the ambition. I said, you know, there were many books I read that were very important and influential to me as I was trying to understand this organization I was going into, the Marines, and understand what war was. You know, books like you know, Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, or Jim Webb's Fields of Fire, or you know, Phil Caputo's A Rumor of War. Many of those books, the majority of them were novels, and I said, you know, I just had this abstract idea. Someday there's going to be some kid out there who's going to be like this version of who I was, and that kid's going to reach and you know want to go into the military, and they're going to reach for a book that was about the last war, and my last war was your war, Vietnam. And I'm like, you know, and I feel like I want to try to write a book that could speak to that person the way I was spoken to. So the first novel I ever wrote was sort of an autobiographical war novel, which was actually never published. But it kind of launched my career, got me my agent, and but that impulse was one of just being like, you know, I just want people to know how it is because I sort of felt on an intuitive level that like, you know, I was the custodian now of like a sacred type of memory. Like, you know, like it was the Vietnam guys, and it was me, and it's going to be somebody else. And if I don't write this, or people like me don't write this, no one's going to write it. And so that was, you know, that to me, that impulse to say, listen, I'm not going to tell you whether or not you should go in the military. I'm not going to, but I'm obligated to let you know what it is like, as honestly as I can. That's the impulse that has informed my writing, and with any of my kids or any young person, that's sort of what I would want them to know.
What's your future going to bring? Do you have a thought? I mean, you can just, as a writer, you're going to go forward. Have you ever thought about getting into politics or going into some other, you know, focus in your life, your professional life?
No, I write. That's what I do. That's what I love doing. You know, not to be too grandiose about it, but like I'm an artist. It makes me happy to create things. It's very fulfilling to me to put those stories out in the world. And I feel like there are, you know, and you know, I don't want to be in politics. It's just not, it doesn't fit my personality. But I do get a lot of satisfaction that I think you can lead and contribute to civic life through writing. I think you know my writing also does have a you know a civic sensibility to it. No politics for me.
Well, I think I have this right or half right that you say, well, writing in some ways is like being in the military, or maybe is it the discipline? Is it I don't know.
Well, I think that yes, I've often joked, half joking, that actually like being a Marine is excellent preparation for being a writer because so much of the job of being a writer is showing up every day and just sort of suffering. And So, you know, the skills I learned as a Marine, like, you know, you get your workout in every day, you got a PT, you got to do this. Nobody cares how hard it is. Nobody wants your tears. Those are all great like tools to be a writer. You know, if the old dictum, you know, if it ain't raining, we ain't training. Like in my when I show up to work, like if you're not inspired today, nobody cares. You're still working. Like I think it's all good for building anything. So the Marines to me was a very good place to learn the type of discipline required to write.
Well, I'm going back to when you first became a platoon leader, and you're working very hard, as I know you do on everything in terms of leadership. But I think at some point early on, you did something that was a little different than I ever experienced. And did you buy a bunch of books?
I did. I infamously, when I showed up to my first platoon, made everybody read the book Starship Troopers, which is a science fiction novel by a guy named Robert Heinlein, which is sort of a meditation also on like citizenship and the soldier. I said, we'll read a chapter a week, and the guys they hated it. They said, "Sir, like we didn't join the Marines. If we wanted to read books, we would have gone to college. We joined the Marines." So when I talk to young people, I don't recommend them making their platoon
Yeah.
book, but
It,
it's a
it,
great book. And I would just say as a side, you mentioned my friend Sergeant Adam Bonatai. I think of all of the voices in my platoon, he was the loudest and the angriest that we had to write this book, and really gave me a hard time about it. And about 10 years ago, he called me up and he said, I finally read Starship Troopers. It's a pretty good book. And I was like, yeah, you jerk.
that's great. That's just wonderful. So it's not, the Marine Corps didn't adopt that as a part of the recommended platoon leader.
They do, and the Marine Corps has a reading list that's called the Commandant's Reading List, and they encourage Marines to read. And you actually be surprised, Marine Corps is actually a pretty intellectual
Oh,
branch of the service. But I think for young 19 and 20-year-old Marines, as opposed to like the older guys, like they don't want to be sitting around reading books.
that's right. So, a couple of things that, you said that in terms of our recent wars before this war, and I don't know if this counts as a war, I guess it's a war now, it was an attack, but that the way the United States funded them had a real impact in terms of the course of the war and dealing with it and so forth. What's that all about?
Well, I think it's very important for us to be, cognizant as citizens of the not just that we're fighting a war, but the way we're fighting a war. So, if you think about the history of the United States, every war we fight has had a construct to sustain it. And what I mean by that construct, I mean basically wars are sustained broadly speaking in two ways: through blood, who's going to fight the war, and through treasure, how are we going to pay for it? So, like for instance, if you go back to the American Revolution. The blood was the Continental Army and militias, and a lot of the treasure came from France. Or if we look at the Civil War, the first ever draft in the US is done to sustain the Civil War, and the first ever income tax we have is during the Civil War to fund it. World War II, the construct there was a sort of a national mobilization, war bond drives. And Vietnam, we had a draft that was very unpopular that helped speed up the end of that war. So after 9/11 happens, we're going to war again, and we need a construct to sustain the war. So what becomes the construct? It becomes the blood is our all volunteer military, and the treasure is deficit spending. We basically, we borrow the money, so there's no war tax. So the result of that construct of volunteer military and deficit spending, one of the results is the American people have become basically anesthetized to the cost of war. Like nobody feels it, and it's not because it's not because we're, an indifferent people. Just nothing is asked of Americans if they're not serving in the military. And one of the results of that sort of anesthetization of war is you wind up with a war that just kind of goes on and on and on and on. Because unlike in the past, being at war is not existentially uncomfortable for our society. We can just sort of do it forever. And I think that's why that's one of I think that's the biggest reason we wind up with this 20-year war in Afghanistan. So, if you ask me, like, what's the single greatest lessons from the war in Iraq and Afghanistan? It's that if a politician comes to you and says, "Hey, we're going to launch a major war, but don't worry, it's going to come at no cost to you. You're not even going to notice it." Like, watch out because you're probably getting sold a war that's going to last for a very, very long time because it becomes politically more difficult to end the war than to just keep it going.
Thank you. Yes. And related to that is something that you've opined on, which to me is something that, with respect to both of those wars, that affected the way I view things, and that is when you're in a situation where there's no draft.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us your thoughts on that, and the professional army and the implications of that, the impact on going to war.
Well, sure. So, I mean, I think for some of the reasons we just discussed, I've written about this. I'm for a draft. I think a draft would be good. It would be healthy for American civil life. Now, people usually, when I say this, say, "Whoa, whoa, 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 a draft! Like you're going to take the entire U.S. military and have it be a bunch of conscripts?" And no. I think that if we actually look at the draft has meant different things at different times. I think you could have a draft in the United States where maybe 5% of the U.S. military was drafted. And with no real degradation of capability, we still have just as effective of the U.S. military. And what you really want, what the tonic is really not so much the draft per se, but it's the specter of a draft. If every American family knew that when their child, boy or girl, turned 18, that they had a 1 in 50 chance of being drafted into the U.S. military for 2 years, 1 in 20 chance, depending on, how many folks you want. I think it would radically change the conversations around war and peace in this country, and actually probably start to demilitarize this country. Imagine the debate in Iran right now. If every family that had a child who was 18 years old knew that, come May, their draft number would be called. And yes, there'd probably be a somewhat small chance they get called up, but they might. And then, you're not going to college or doing whatever else your plans are when you're 18. And I think it would give us a much more sensible foreign policy.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else, any other thoughts you have that you want to share with the assembled multitude, or
I just have to thank everybody. Thanks everybody for having me. And if you enjoyed the conversation, check out some of the books that were mentioned. And I think this is a great program you all have. And thank you, Tom and Carolyn, for hosting me. I loved our conversation.
Great. And I will tell everybody that the books are just amazing, but Elliot is very prolific in terms of commenting on things on a continuing basis, thoughtfully, in a very informed way. And so, I would encourage you to take advantage of that. So, Carolyn, are
Yes,
you there?
I am jumping back in. First, I want to thank you, Elliot, for making time, and I know it is your very busy schedule these days, to join us and to share so openly with us. I think, Tom, you did a masterful job I'm not going to say drawing Elliot out, because I think Elliot was so generous in sharing with us his experiences and his thoughts. And, I certainly second the recommendation to read some of his books. I have to just tell you, Elliot, your dad was always so proud of you, and I really understand why. And I think what you do is really doing his memory proud, and
Thank you.
it pleases me no end. And of course, I know that your mom set the example. She was the role model for writing. I don't think maybe Tom didn't know that, but Elliot's mom, Joanne Leiden Ackerman, is equally as prolific and writes some pretty good books. I'm going to thank you both and then quickly switch floors to just tell our audience, and interestingly, our audience stuck with you. I mean, that's the sign, I think, of a good interview. But I'm going to tell them about our next Fridays at 1. It'll be on May 1st, our final one for this semester, and the speaker will be an author named Michelle Young. She's an award-winning journalist and author. Her latest book, and this is a very different topic from what we've been looking at today, although with a relationship to war, she wrote The Art Spy, and it's a long title, The Extraordinary Untold Tale of World War II Resistance Hero Rose Valland. This book was named the best book of 2025 by the New York Public Library. It's the story of a quite heroic French woman, Rose Valland. She was a museum curator who secretly spied on the Nazis at the Jeux de Paume Museum in Paris during World War II. The book, what she was doing was really documenting their systematic looting of art. And she was passing crucial intelligence to the resistance. The book, based on new documents, I must say, portrays her as a, quote, female monuments man who risked her life to save cultural treasures. According to Publisher Weekly, The Art Spy is a, quote, thrilling saga. Readers will relish this riveting tale of a clever war hero playing the long game against bumbling fascists. Interviewing Michelle Young will be our own LP Square member, Deborah Marco, who's an art historian and a lecturer. And I just encourage you to put it on your calendar and hope you will join us on May 1st at 1 p.m. And in the meantime, again, I thank Elliot and Tom and wish you all an enjoyable weekend.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Carolyn, for setting this all up.
It's my pleasure.